Well, hello, everyone. Congratulations to the students on your awards. I know what it takes to get there, and I know what it means to have a boost from those people who believe in you. And the good people here certainly do believe in you. So you are not only surrounded by a village, but part of the village. And I think that's something that makes it very, very powerful, because hearing your big dreams, clearly that village has invested in the right women, because you are obviously going to be giving back for a very long time. I love the topic of today, really on the power of resilience and what it means in changing the world, right? Which is hopefully what many of us think. It was funny when we first discussed this topic, I had to laugh and I was like, really? Resilience? Is that what we're talking about? Because it means so much to me. I even wrote a kid's book about it. Because being a woman taking a non-traditional path, it's one where, it doesn't follow the normal goal setting model. And as a PhD in psychology, I've taught classes on goal setting, right? Start with the big goal and work backwards and, create moments along the way that build on each other so that you get to that highest place. But that hasn't worked in so many parts of my own journey. Sure, it did with getting a PhD, but when you're doing something that has never been done, it's very difficult to start with the end game and work backwards. And so for me, I remember one time, and I was actually teaching a class in goal setting, and I had to stop and think, but why doesn't that fit in my own life? And I want to take you back to when I was a young girl and I was practicing my autograph. And my mom walked upstairs. She said, "Jenny, what are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, Mom, I'm practicing my autograph." And she said, "Well, why? What do you need an autograph for?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to be famous, Mom." And she said, "Oh, that's great. What are you going to be famous in?" And I said, "Well, I'm not quite sure yet. It's either as an actress or an athlete." And I don't think I really understood just how much I meant by that, because though I've been one of the toughest athletes in the world, a lot of the times, part of that was acting like I knew what was coming next or what was I doing, because there had to be a little bit of fake it till you make it along the way. I became a tennis player first. I think I gravitated towards tennis because it was the one sport where I could see women playing on TV. And I always thought they were everything a woman should be. They were beautiful and powerful and strong. And they were out there playing their game on their, by their rules and competing with everything that they had. And I was a young tennis player. At the highest point, I was ranked about 50 in the state of Florida. And then I went to this next level coach, this person who was supposed to, transform my game, take me to the next level, make me that person. And he said, because of my size and my build, I would never be strong enough to play pro tennis. Now, full disclosure, though, I've done some big things. They do not come in a very big package. I am all of 5'2", and I had not yet at that time reached my top height of 5'2". So this tiny little kid who didn't have a lot of muscles, but had a lot of hustle, kind of became a little bit heartbroken. And the person who fought to be on the court every day started finding other things to play, other things to do. But I did start lifting weights because I didn't want anybody to ever tell me ever again that I could never be strong enough. But I found my place in team sports, because in tennis, you had to have all the answers. You were the start, the finish, the serve, the volley, the everything. And as a small kid. I may not have had all of the answers, but what I found in team sports is that I could be a really great part of every equation. And I really excelled in team sports, not only because of what I contributed, but how I contributed and how I came to the field every day and just, kind of wanted everybody around me to be great and have a great time doing it. So I found my place in team sports, but I did not yet find my way to my field of dreams because I loved football from an early age. I remember going and watching the sport, right? And thinking that the players looked like real life superheroes. They were larger than life to me, and I wanted to be one. And yet, it was also the first place in the world that somebody told me that boys were allowed to do things that girls weren't. And so I didn't get to play football at that time. And it was kind of like I had a crush from afar, right? Like I had this love of this game and I always hoped it would notice me back. But it wasn't time for that. Not yet, anyway. I went to college and I found rugby, and that was full circle to me. It was like soccer meets football, and I finally got to tackle. And I didn't get the pads and the helmet yet, but I certainly got as good as you possibly could at literally tackling everyone and everything. I learned that even at 5'2", there was no one I couldn't tackle. And I was so good at it that I actually got recruited for the under 23 national team. And yet I yet again got so close, and they said, but you're too small. I literally got the feedback at that point that I was by far the best prop there. There were people on the opposing teams who were, terrified of me. But at this level, they could teach someone else to do what I did. They could not double my size. So despite the fact that I had dominated the competition, despite the reputation I had, despite all the muscle and all the hustle, they still couldn't take me because they could teach someone else to do what I did, but they could not double my size. So this has become a recurring theme in my life. Too little for tennis, too little for the national team in rugby. And at some point you start thinking maybe you were just too little in this world, right? Maybe I just didn't have enough. Maybe I was, always dreaming too big. My last name is Welter, and maybe that's God's irony because I'm not even heavy enough for my own weight class. So I've been punching above my weight my whole life. And I took a real job. Thought I'm going to go into the business world. This is what I'm meant to do. And yet something was still missing, right? I was good at my job. I was making good money, doing all these things. And I remember telling my mom, I felt like I was dying a little bit each day because there had to be more in this world for me. There had to be something more that I was meant to do. And I was playing flag football on weekends, teaching aerobics before and after work. And the general manager of a team called the Mass Mutiny called the flag league and said, is there anybody in your league who you think could play tackle? Well, full disclosure, having come from rugby, I never really got the flag thing. I was probably still always tackling. So they said, please take her. Get her out of here. She needs to be tackling. She already does. So I got an open tryout to the Mass Mutiny, to a sport that I had loved from afar my whole life. And now it was going to be up close and personal. And I personally had an opportunity to play the sport of my dreams. And maybe it was too close. I got scared. I started wondering, what would I do if they told me I was too little again? What would I do if I got so close to this sport I'd always wanted to have an opportunity in, and I wasn't enough? And I remember thinking that maybe I shouldn't go. Maybe I should just, always think I could have played football. And what I ended up realizing is I could live with being told I was too small. I'd heard that my whole life. But what I couldn't live with was wondering for the rest of my life, what would have happened if I would have just tried out for that football team? And I say that to you all as somebody who's made history several times, as somebody who went on to win championships and to play for the first and second US national team and to do a whole lot of things that I never could have even dreamed possible at that moment because they didn't exist. And yet me, just like anybody else, I could have been wondering, gosh, I wonder what my life would have been like if I would have just. And so anytime you get to that point, anytime you feel like you're not enough, anytime that you feel like you fear rejection or you don't know what the outcome is going to be, do what I did and realize that hearing no or not being enough, that's okay. You can live with it. You can regroup. You can find something better. You can go lift weights. You can control what you can control. But what you don't want to do is live the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if. Because I can tell you what, I sure wouldn't be here talking today with all of you if I would not have had the courage to go that day. You know, football is an interesting sport. People always ask me, how did you never quit? How did you get back up after getting knocked down so many times? And I kind of stop and I think, that's the game. It's not a question of if you'll get hit, it's when. And the truth is that then it's not about whether or not you'll get back up. It's how you get back up. And when you get back up, do it with attitude because the opponents are watching. Because you can't just lay down on the field and give up and surrender. You've got to get up and make the next play. So it's always been a matter of finding the best ways to make the next plays. And those plays weren't even ones I could predict. Remember, I told you the reverse goal setting. The goal setting didn't work in my life. But what did was the mentality of stepping up to each challenge the game put in my way. If you don't have an ultimate goal, then how do you keep moving? The way you keep moving is you keep showing up every day and stepping up to every challenge the game puts in your way. And that was my philosophy. Very simply, do work every day. Find a way to make plays even when it is certainly far from equal pay for equal work for women in sports, particularly the sport of football, in which I still remember the first check I ever got for playing women's pro football. It was after the 2004 season. We had won our first championship, our first Super Bowl, and we got a ring and a check for $12. Literally, it was $1 a game. And yet that check is still one of the most important checks I've ever gotten to this day. It's actually a check that is currently housed in the Pro Football Hall of Fame because it was the difference between playing for free and becoming a pro. Now I say pro because at $1 a game, we couldn't afford all those letters. We could not afford the professional, but it was a start. And that was before photo deposit. That was before you could cash it and keep it. So that was actually a conscious choice, right? We had to cash it or keep it. And I kept it because I knew what I was doing it for. I wasn't doing it with the promise of a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I believed that we were all, every one of us believed that if in the final frontier for women in sports, in the sport that has taken over Thanksgiving and made it a conscious choice that you either watched the game or you were in the kitchen cooking, that's a personal affront to me every time one of those guys makes a comment or a troll makes a comment of getting back in the kitchen. right? That is one of the most common insults we hear as women in sports. Oh, you can't do that. Go make me a sandwich. And I think about it and I'm like, I think that dichotomy started in the game that I made history in, because it was a choice of where you spent Thanksgiving. And it never made sense to me. And it still doesn't, which is probably why, there are a lot of people who think there is nothing I can't do. And I have to kind of look at them and be like, well, actually, that's not true. I can't cook. It's probably still a mental barrier to this day, right? Because of the way it has been separated in our society. And I look at that sport and I think this is America's game. And yet it is the one sport that does not have parity at any level from peewees to the pros. And so I always thought, if this is the game we're not supposed to play, if this is the thing that we're not supposed to do, then when we do this as women, when we take this game and do it the right way, and when we play it well, can't we not only change the sport? Can't we not only change the culture around the sport, but can't we change culture through this sport? And I still look at that every single day. I did not set out to play men's pro football. In fact, if you would have asked me throughout my entire career, I answered that question many times. And I said, I am 5'2", 130 pounds. I would never play football against men. I'm not crazy. Well, apparently God doesn't like never. And certainly I am my own brand of crazy, because what happened was a team called the Texas Revolution asked me to go through a day of training camp with their guys. Smile for the camera, take some pictures, get you guys some good pub. Yeah, Jen, that'd be great. Absolutely not. That's an insult to me as someone who just won my second gold medal. And if I was any one of the guys on your team, I would absolutely hate it. If I'm going to do anything with you and your football team, either I do everything they do step for step, hit for all of training camp, or I do nothing at all. And boy, oh boy, those moments where the words come out of your mouth and then you catch up to them in your mind. Oh, I knew without a shadow of a doubt, I had just changed the course of not only my destiny, but the course of football, because I was going to play pro football against men, because I was going to do it the right way, because I would not let them use me as a publicity stunt or a token woman. And then I also might have just gotten myself killed. I did not set out to do it, but the way the world evolved and the promise I had made to step up to every challenge, it gave me no other choice. And we as women, a lot of the times, will not see ourselves going up to that highest level, but we also don't quit. We may not project ourselves into changing history, but we also won't back down. And that is often the strength of women. It is humble, but it is stronger than even we know. And that has certainly been what drove me in my career. I would step up and take hits from those guys every day. You know why? Because I was doing it on behalf of all of the women who I loved so very much and who I knew we had been in the trenches, sacrificing so much, playing for $1 a game, that we were the best kept secret in sports, and we didn't need to be a secret anymore. That's why you would do it. And I tell you, and I focused on not the part that most people know of, the NFL, because you know what, that story's been well told, but it's what made me that person that makes so many of us. It's the work done in the dark. It is the work that people don't see. It's the strength that is fortified by the people that we love and the care that we put into doing things that other people simply would not put the same value on. We did it for all of the women who had been told that they couldn't do something because they were a woman. And that was what drove me to step into the world of men's pro football. And I'll tell you what, nobody gave a damn about me, even when I was one of the best women's players in the world with 2 gold medals representing the USA in America's game. No one cared. No one knew. It took me literally being willing to get tackled by men to change the game for women. And it was the relationships that I formed with those players on that team that actually caught the attention of the head coach the next year, who said, "Who is this girl that all my guys love?" And they said, "Coach, that's your running back." And he sat me down and he grilled me on football. And at the end of the conversation the next day, he said, "You have to coach my football team." And I said, "No." He said, "What do you mean, no?" I said, No, women don't coach football." And then, I've never coached football and you want me to coach men's pro football? Like, no, I'm not doing it. And Wendell said, "Not a lot of guys are going to give you this opportunity. You're taking this job." And I said, "No." And I hung up on him. And the next day he called me back and told me about myself. He said, "Do you remember how I told you not a lot of guys were going to give you this opportunity and you were taking this job?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Good. I took it for you. You're coaching for me. And by the way, you can't quit. Otherwise, the narrative surrounding women coaching in men's pro football will be, we had a girl once and she quit." And I'm going to end with that story before we transition to Q&A for this reason and this reason alone. Ladies, we often overcheck boxes before we will allow ourselves to go to the next level. We will talk ourselves out of the places and spaces that we belong in because we feel like we have to have not only all the answers, but be perfect and perfectly ready for every new challenge. Guys don't do that. And I lovingly say that Wendell drop kicked me into success because he saw something in me before I even saw it in myself. So ladies, be bold. Don't be afraid to go after something, even if you have not been able to see someone who looks like you doing it. And for the guys out there, don't be afraid to see something in someone else, in those women around you, before she even sees it in herself. Thank you.
Awesome. Giving you a virtual clap. Dr. Jen, inspiring goosebumps. And I'm sure those that are in attendance also are feeling inspired and motivated on this morning. Such a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you everyone for joining us for the Women's Empowerment Summit here. Produced and presented by Henry County Chamber of Commerce. I'm Shana Thornton, and we're back with a Q&A session. I would like to remind you that this is your time to get questions and concerns and feedback in with this top headline speaker, Dr. Jen Welter. Dr. Jen, when you were speaking, you described about getting knocked down, and you said it's not a matter of when, you know it's going to happen and you just have to get back up. And I just visualize thinking that's life, right? Life happens, and we know there are going to be dynamics that go up and down, but we have to stay strong. That leads us to the first question. Where do you see the future of football in terms of women and the impact we have on it long term, dealing with everything that women and working professionals deal with from day to day?
Well, first of all, for all of us in business, we have to realize that the business of sports is also the business of women, okay? If you didn't know this, okay, and I did a lot of talks on this yesterday because it was Equal Pay Day, 4% of sports media coverage goes to women in sports, 4%. 0.4% of sponsorship dollars go to women in sports. So in one of the most visible platforms, right? In one of the places and spaces where we see, the human spirit and competition play out in real time, in real ways. In one of the only places I can think of where, other than Halloween, or a masquerade ball, that people are championed and actually celebrated for face paint and insanity, because we get to leave ourselves for a little bit and live through the worlds of others. We have yet to appreciate women at their highest competitive level in anywhere close to the way that we celebrate men. Now, why is that important? Because if you ask C-suite executives, most of those women who are in the C-suite say, I played sports. I got my love for competition through sports. I got confidence through sports. And yet, what are we showing our daughters when they see 96% of the coverage go to men, or 99.6% of the dollars go to the men in sports? Can we really tell them that they are just as important competing in sports when we're showing them everything else? Kids are smart. They don't fall for that. Now, half of girls will opt out of sports by the time they finish puberty. And when asked, 7 out of 10 girls said, society doesn't support me in sports. 7 out of 10 said that they didn't feel like they belonged in sports. And 7 out of 10 said there are not enough visible female role models in sports. So we all play a role in changing those dynamics. Now, depending on who you ask, some people say it's 70% of the purchasing power lies with women. Some say it's up to 87%. You all know who controls the purse strings. So that means, ladies, let's put our dollars where our passions are and invest in businesses that are investing in women, invest in companies that are backing women, put our dollars to the change that we want to see in society, not just in football, but in all areas.
Yeah. So true. You mentioned celebration of men, and it doesn't quite always match up with the celebration of women. Let's talk about self-value and self-worth, right? There are many points in the lives of women, and sometimes when they're younger, they want to be accepted and want to be celebrated as much, which is important. But what would you say to that working professional woman watching us today who doesn't feel she's in an environment where she is valued and appreciated? How can she push through that?
Well, goodness, I mean, the first thing is, where do you feel value and where can you contribute? Okay. One of my good guy friends told me once, I was fighting a bad uphill battle in football. And he said, Jen, go where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated.
Wow.
Okay. Because those are very different things. Okay. And we all know that at times people will say, oh, yes, well, we have gender diversity or we have racial diversity, and they'll throw it up on a poster if you let them. And yet what matters with diversity and inclusion is not that just that you have someone there, but are they included in the conversations? Are their vantage points heard? Is your voice a part of changing the dynamic? Because just having me in the room, that's not enough. You need to know that, hey, this impacts women differently, or this is not acceptable, or culturally, this is not okay, right? We have to be in those places. And what's really hard for all of us as we make choices on where we are going to invest our time and energy is, what is the ROI going to be in your life? And if you find yourself in a place, in a space where truly you are not allowed to be your best self, then my advice is parallel. Always do the best where you're at, but always realize that there are other things for you. And abusive situations, whether it's in a relationship or in society or in business, part of the way that they maintain the status quo is by breaking you down and not championing you to find your voice and to find your best self. And if you have people around you, or you are in a position where those dynamics are at play, I would say create your game plan. Maybe that means going back to school or whatever it is, but create your game plan so you are not reliant on a place or a space that will not allow you
Wow.
to reach the heights that you are capable of.
Yeah. Of course, there are many facets of business that are celebrated, but there are lots of women on with us today that are entrepreneurs as well. So they've created their own place, and we're here to celebrate all the success and achievements of women. Very rare do you have the opportunity to sit exclusively with the first female coach of the National Football League. Ladies, you have that opportunity. We're encouraging you right now in the chat, in the Q&A. Please get your questions in and your feedback, and Dr. Jen will take them on one-on-one. So get them in for us because we're on limited time. I have a question for you. Before you became the first female coach in the NFL, you were the first female to play in a skilled position as well. And you mentioned that in your testimony and presentation. You were clearly on a very male-dominated team. What was it like mentally and physically to play with a lot of men or males that were clearly twice your size? What was that like?
Well, honestly, most of the women were twice my size too. So, I think what's important is the game is the game. And how you play it or where you fit in it changes, right? The guys were bigger, faster, stronger. That is true. But what they needed to know was two things. They needed to know, one, that I belonged. I was there for the right reasons.
Okay.
Right? I couldn't say, you can't hit me, I'm a girl. That was the job description. Right? Like, I'm a running back. That is the job description. I'm going to get hit every play, particularly in indoor, because there is no such thing as running out of bounds. Right? Because it's basically, if you don't know, it's in a hockey arena. So there's no out of bounds, which means running back's going to get hit every play. And I couldn't expect the rules to be different for me, because then that's not respecting the game. Right? Then that means I wasn't out there for the same reason. So they needed to know that, number one. Number two, they needed to know that we could get along. Right? That there were going to be moments, but that I would give it as well as I would take it, meaning that we could laugh and we could joke. And I think once we got those two things locked in, we really became better together. Right? I learned so much in that situation. I was used to being the enforcer, right? Like one of the, the baddies, right? Like one of the players that people feared internationally. Yes. And now I'm on a men's team and I am scratching and clawing and fighting to, hold on to the bottom rung, right? And to bring value. And those guys made me better, because one of the things they taught me is, Jen, it can't be you versus us. It has to be us versus the world. And they really taught me how to be a great teammate as opposed to somebody who was an outsider on their team. And I think that was something that I really still cherish. And I laugh often with women and I say, don't worry about it. I speak dude, right? Like, I speak dude. Do you need me to translate? And I definitely translate for the guys on where they would get themselves in trouble with like their wives and their girlfriends. And that made me a very, very, very valuable asset. They'd be like, oh, she knows. Hey, coach, come here. You got a minute? What? Yeah, what's up? Coach, my wife is so mad at me and I don't even know what I did. And I'd be like, okay, what did you do? Well, coach, I said this. Okay, she heard this. But coach, why did she hear that when I said this? Baby, I don't have time to explain all of that. Do you want me to tell you what you need to do to fix it? Yes, coach. And I'll tell you what, ladies, when you can coach them on that, and then you need to coach them on something else, they will always listen. It was very, very easy to change a football technique when they trusted you and loved you enough to bring you into their life.
Wow. So you're really emphasizing the importance of rapport and relationship building, right? I mean, so I would imagine over your career and your personal and professional life, that's something you would encourage all of us to really pursue.
Absolutely. The best and most valuable thing that we have in our lives are the people, right? Yeah. Any business, I don't care what it is, that's your human capital. Right? It doesn't run without the people who make it run. And I think, in football, particularly, we see it a lot. People forget that those players are very real people, right? I said earlier, they look like superheroes. So sometimes we expect them to be them. And yet people have ups and downs in life.
Yes.
And
That's
what
right.
makes a big difference is when you treat them like humans, even in the roughest, toughest sport in the game. So empathy is one of the most powerful leadership traits that any one of us can possess and
Yeah.
that we have to work on and develop.
Yeah. And it's acknowledging that people matter and everyone deserves the right to be seen and heard. So key. You are witnessing and experiencing an amazing 2021 Women's Empowerment Summit. And we're having a great conversation back and forth with the one and only Dr. Jen. Of course, she's the first female coach in the NFL. And we want you to put your questions and feedback in. We have a great question from the live chat, Dr. Jen. Who was your role model? Did you have one?
No, honestly. I didn't have one person that I said I want to be her. And so for me, that's really important to give girls.
Okay.
That's why I founded Gridiron Girls. Because knowing how I didn't have that person to look to, I also challenged myself to push to be that person. And I think I know that, for example, we talked about resilience and getting back up and how do you keep going? On the days when I'm not sure what to do, or I might not feel like I have the strength, I think about all the young girls, right? Who are the next generation and who, some of them like Kaylee, who is in the Boston area. She came to her first Gridiron Girls camp when she was like 4.5.
Wow.
Okay? She is 8 now. Now we normally say that you can't, that our minimum age is 6. So you do the math on that one. I remember her mom wanting her to go. And I said, Mom, that's your call. I'm not checking birth certificates. But I think she told me she was about 5 then. Now we're rewinding the clock. And I'm like, Mom, how did that work? And she just kind of looks at me. But Kaylee is a boss. She is out on that field tearing it up. And she's like, I'm a football player. She is in the gym. She's doing agility, ladder drills. She has her besties on. Another girl named Touchdown Girl Jazz, whose dad reached out to me and said, my daughter just so badly wants to be a Gridiron Girl, right? And to me, Gridiron Girls had always been the girls that I had on the field in the camps, right? And I was like, how do I do that? And I was like, well, I can send her a shirt. And he's like, oh my gosh, she would make her life. And Kaylee and Jazz had never met in person. They connected through Gridiron Girls. And now they're like best friends, both off the field and on. And those girls give me life, right? And I think we all need those places and spaces that we find it.
Yeah, that is so true. And for you to reach back and help as well. We have a great question coming from our live chat. And we did talk about celebrating women and having value. And this particular question says, but how do you mentally handle the knowledge of less than equal pay? Finances matter, right? To be able to take care of your household and keep putting in your all. And I know in your presentation, you mentioned you just have to do it. You have to show up. But for many working professional women, that's easier said than done when you're saying, okay, not only am I not being respected or listened to on the job and others are getting credited with my ideas perhaps, but now I look at the paycheck every week and I'm not able to make it.
It's one day at a time. And I think talking about it is a big part of it. Let's use the NCAA, for example. Okay. Where we have, as I said, with what was going on, I said, they put the madness in March Madness. And yet those of us who have been in women's sports and we saw the disparity that the women's basketball team was experiencing versus the men, I was not surprised. That's the scary part. I've seen it. I've experienced it. We all have. And so it was not shocking. But what was powerful is that it was being talked about and that those differences were brought to light and that through that conversation, it created activation, right? And then there's instigation to say that we can't let this go on, because those of us who have suffered in silence, right, as women in sports, and just kind of taken it on, we knew it, we have felt it, we have lived it. And yet when other people saw just the stark, visible example, they got mad and they said, well, how can this be? And so you need all the people who would see it and say, how could this be? In order to say, we're not going to let what has been always be, right? And that means we have to keep working. We have to keep shining. And women, we also have to be willing to say I instead of just we. And that is something that honestly is actually socialized from the time we are kids. I still remember research from my freshman year in college. This is how powerfully it hit my mind, that girls are socialized to play games that have a we mentality, right? And that we did this, and they will actually be taught to switch games before they celebrate over each other, right? Like we don't see the girls with the end zone dances like, in your face, look what I did. But boys do, and boys are celebrated for that. Now, why am I talking about how kids play? I'm talking about how kids play because what they found is that plays out in corporate culture, where women continue to say we, and guys continue to listen for I, because guys have been taught to speak in I. And so if you did work, you say I, whereas women will literally we themselves to death. And so we need to learn to put the I in the equation. So not to minimize other people, but also to balance that with highlighting yourself so that people have the ability to see what you did, because that is important.
Yeah, it is certainly important. And I think it emphasizes, as you pointed out, for when you work with the Gridiron Girls, your group and your program for these young women, to see women taking different paths as well, for them to become comfortable with that as well, and be as secure and confident as possible when they get in those leadership positions to help and influence and inspire. Ms. Rosa has a great question in our live Q&A, and you did mention your program working with young women as well. But can you particularly mention what you're doing or your interaction that or engagement you're having with other women, your peers, perhaps, not just in the world of sports, but other arenas as well, in terms of inspiring and motivating each other?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I spend, I lovingly say that's the common thread is I want to uplift, inspire, and help empower whoever that is, right? Sometimes it's guys, making them better. Sometimes it's the young girls. And a lot of the times it's women. Now, women, interestingly, ladies, especially those of you watching, when I first got out of the NFL, women were not my biggest supporters.
Wow.
Because so many women felt like that football was a place and a space that they weren't invited into and that they couldn't relate to. It took about 2 years of really being open and sharing the common ground, right? That wasn't X's and O's, that were the life challenges and journeys that kind of got me to my field of dreams and developed that commonality. So it really took a while for women to see that we were more alike than we were different. It was actually guy football fans, ages 25 to 55, that found me the most relatable at first. And now that has shifted, but it was interesting because when my PR numbers were pulled early, it was young girls and it was males ages 25 to 55 who most related. And it's taken me really telling stories like today where, I did it on the football field, but could y'all say anything about football from that journey other than tackling? No. And we all tackle things. It just may not be on the football field.
Right.
Right. But it took being intentional to show how much we are alike, in order to really be able to have that conversation. And I loved hearing that actually from a woman I did a keynote with for. It was like my first giant keynote, right?
Yeah.
Thousands of people in this huge conference building, right? And I got off the stage and I had 2 standing ovations. And this woman comes up to me and she's like, oh my gosh, you spoke to my spirit. And she had like tears in her eyes. And I was like, oh man, I'm like, thank you so much. And she's like, and I didn't expect it. And I went, huh? And she said, yeah, I was actually mad that you were our keynote speaker. Okay. And she said, I heard it. And I said, what is some football coach going to have to tell to me as a woman in business? And I said, okay. And she said, but as I listened to you, I realized you weren't talking about football at all. And she's like, I found myself just hearing you speak to me in so many of your journeys, but I never imagined that we would be so much alike. Yeah. And, I think that society does a good job of finding ways to separate us. And yet I say all the time, when we're divided, we are easily conquered because we are taken from a position where we can find strength in each other and pitted as competition with each other.
And you're right. And we have to realize that we have more in common than not. And the bond of resiliency is certainly there. What a great conversation. You are certainly inspiring and motivating us and educating us as well about your unique journey, of course, as being the first female coach in the NFL. Now, as you may recall, I'm sure better than I do, at the beginning of the 2020 NFL season, there was a regular season game between Washington and Cleveland Browns, where there were 3 females on the gridiron serving in official capacity. This was history making. You know that. It went down in the books. Do you see this as a game changer?
No, I see it as a necessary step in progress, right? We had in 2015, that was a game changer. Okay. With Sarah Thomas and I shook hands on the sidelines. So her first game was my first game.
Yes.
Okay. And that handshake between a ref and a coach was the first time in the history of the National Football League that a ref and a coach shook hands, and it was 2 women.
Wow.
And we thought of it as a promise that there would be more women. So it's a logical progression that you should get another woman on the sidelines of the other side, right? So yes, it is history making, but I don't think of it as not being what we should expect to see at this point, right? We're talking 6 years later to add 1 more woman to the equation.
Wow.
Right? So yes, it's important. And I love all of those women and I am glad to see it. Yes. Right? But what we need to do at some point is realize that what's powerful is not all of these first moments, but knowing that we have seconds and thirds and fourths and fifths, and that this is a new normal, right? First is important because we have to see it as different, right? And the journey of first is tough and not everybody wants it, right? But at what point do we start saying like, this is what it should be?
Yes.
Right? Sarah Thomas was there with me. Okay, now we have 2 coaches. So that should be the case. Not at 6 years later, we're saying, oh my gosh, look how much progress we've made, right? So it is important and it is vitally important, but it was also not the only time this season that you had more than 1 woman on the field. So let's start realizing that there is strength in consistent change. I told somebody the other day that sometimes I wish I was 3rd.
Wow. How come?
You know why? Yeah, because the first is divisive in nature. You are the person who is rocking the boat of the status quo. You have literally changed everything. Yours is the face of change.
Yes.
right? I literally had somebody tell me once that mine was the face of change, which also meant it was the face of nightmares to those who did not want change.
Wow.
So the first is always controversial. Now, the second, unfortunately, is often in the shadow of the first, right? And, they'll be compared to the first. There's that. And because then there's only two data points at that point too, right? So if women have been taught that we need a seat at the table, which already says that there's only room for one, right? Women, we get a seat at the table. How big is this table? And why is it only a seat? Okay. But if you have first and second, then that's what that means. Is the second taking the seat from the first? Are they inherently at competition? And a lot of the times, yes, that's what's pitted. But the third is out of the shadow of the first. And she probably actually just gets to do work, right? She gets to go in and it's no longer controversial. People have started to realize that this is accepted. There's more power in the third. It's not just an exception to the rule. It's starting to establish a new rule, right? And one that is more inclusive. So, being the first is hard every day, right? And there is a weight on your shoulders every day. But I think by the time you're the third, you're not necessarily having to always have that mantle of being an instigator of change. You actually just get to do the job.
Yeah, I will say I appreciate everyone that comes through that door. And it reminds us of something said earlier, that leave the door wide enough for others to come through, and your contributions and your legacy is so amazing, Dr. Jen. Truly, we are pressed for time, but thank you so much. Great feedback coming from our live chat as well, and Q&A, saying you are really inspiring them today. They're giving you virtual claps as well. Before you get out of here, we have to ask, and you've shared so much already, but if you could give us just a summary really quick, what would you say to the working professional woman that's watching you right now, and she's got a lot on her plate, and you show resiliency, you demonstrate and you epitomize courage on so many levels, but maybe she's questioning herself in some areas. Maybe she has not seen quite the success you have seen, but she visualizes a better life, a better career at some point. What would you say to her, Dr. Jen?
I would say, first of all, you, baby girl, need to be as good to yourself as you probably are to everyone else in your life, right? Women, we are expected to be all things to all people at all times, while also keeping our family fed, our face, our war paint on perfect, and doing it walking up a hill backwards, wearing high heels, and likely carrying the weight of the world on this shoulder and the ideas of yourself on this one, right? Like we are so hard on ourselves. And yet we are also often the people who are the soft place to land for everyone else. So if you are being hard on yourself, my first thing is you need to find a way to be a little better to yourself. And I challenge myself with that every day, because there is no harsher critic of me than me. Trust me. Okay. Because I always feel like I am capable of so much more, which that then makes it feel like you're never enough, right? So we have to do better in terms of allowing ourselves to be happy with the process. It's not just an outcome. This is your everyday life. And no, guess what? They say patience is a virtue. Well, clearly, ladies, I am not that virtuous, because I want more, and I want it now, and I want it for every single one of you. And I want it for myself, and I want it for the world. And I look at these things, and sometimes it's like, and the higher you go, the more you see that needs to be done, right? There are so many times in my career I've thought like, okay, maybe this is it. And then I go, oh, that's a thing too, right? Even publishing my book, It got turned down by every publisher. And they said, women in football doesn't sell. And I said, pretty sure I was the first. So how many times have you tried? And yet what I found is the first, you're then the first, and you're then the first. And you often feel early, which means you feel crazy because you see something that no one else has yet come around to, or they might have, but you don't know them. And they might be seeing the same thing somewhere else, but y'all don't know each other, or you haven't gotten to talk about it. And you might be fighting parallel battles. So we have to fortify ourselves. And that means, ladies, you are not meant to be perfect. Perfect is intimidating. It is momentarily attainable at best. Like, Shayna, your hair looks great today. If you walked outside in a hurricane, it is gone in a moment. So you better have taken a snapshot of that perfection, because it's not lasting. So we are so hard on ourselves with these ideals of perfection, and yet they are not realistic minute to minute. So fortify yourselves with the people who will build into you and not judge you for having a bad day. They will help you find a way to feel better about yourself, to find a way to getting you to the next level of your life, of your career, up to whatever it is. But fortify yourself. And ladies, do that for each other. Find a circle of trust, inspiration, motivation, where you say, you know what? Okay, we want to go to the gym. We're going to go together. We want to up our business game. We're going to learn together, right? Because we are meant to have a team and a tribe and a sisterhood. So if you feel like you don't have it in and of yourself, allow yourself the gift of bringing people in close enough. Because I used to think that true strength was never admitting weakness, and it's not. That's some BS they wrote or they probably put in a football movie somewhere. But true strength is actually admitting where you are in the world to empower others through your struggle, and to find new levels of strength that you have to crack through that idea of perfection in order to get there.
Wow. Finding new levels of strength. We're going to end on that. So many great nuggets, so much great wisdom, inspiration. I know many of you ladies, as I am, are just goosebumps and just so excited to really take on the world and remain driven. Dr. Jen Welter, what a pleasure to have you really headlining this amazing 2021 Women's Empowerment Summit. So much there for the entire day. And I thank you for all that you do, inspiring young women, young men, and seasoned women and men as well. Thank you so much. And Dodie, we'll go back to you.